First reading is from the book of Acts, chapter 2, verses 42 to 47. You can follow along in your pew Bible. It's found on either page 884 or 1694. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Our second reading this morning is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verses 14 through 29. And this can be found on page 820, 821, or on page 1568 in the pew Bibles. Jesus heals the possessed by an impure spirit. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them, and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. "What are you arguing with them about?" he asked. A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him on the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." "You unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring me the boy." So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," Jesus said, "everything is possible for one who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that the crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" He replied, "This kind can come out only by prayer." May God bless the reading of his holy word.
Thank you, Mike. Will you pray with me? Father, thank you for the music, the word, the time of supporting and affirming those who will guide and us in this renewal journey. Thank you for the opportunity that we have to worship and to grow and to come closer to you. Remove distractions from our minds today, that we might hear your voice and follow your desires in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm going to test your musical history. I thought love was only true in fairy tales. Meant for someone else, but not for me. Love was out to get me. That's the way it seemed. Disappointment haunted all my dreams. Then I saw her face.
Now I'm a believer.
Oh, thank you. Not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love, I'm a believer. I couldn't leave her if I tried. From that great, awesome group, the Monkees. Yeah. Today in our passage, we read a section that says that the early church experienced signs and wonders. And so we're going to talk about that today, and talk about whether we are believers, not in Jesus as Lord, but in Jesus as the God of signs and wonders. And so I want to start out really with a simple question. What are signs and wonders? You may wonder what that means. Well, signs are miracles that were designed to convey instruction. Wonders were miracles which excited that amazement and that awe in people. And a miracle could be both of those things at one time. But the purpose of signs and wonders was to bring people to recognize God, to recognize Jesus as their Messiah, and to come to saving faith. And signs and wonders, miracles, are a pattern in Acts. They were not just present when Jesus was physically present on the earth. Signs and wonders were God's witness to the truth and the power of his words. And so let's look at what the signs and wonders are in Acts. I'm not going to read all this, but I have an entire list here that I found. There probably are more of the signs and wonders that you find in Acts. I'm going to read some of them. It starts actually with the visible appearance of Christ after his resurrection and his ascension into heaven, the day of Pentecost, as days of signs and wonders. But also there were things like a miraculous earthquake that freed Peter from prison. When Ananias heals Saul, Peter raises a woman named Dorcas from the dead. Peter sees a vision and speaks with the Lord. Paul heals a crippled man. The earthquake opened the Philippian jail. Paul was bit by a deadly snake and was not injured. There are just miracle after miracle after miracle. These signs and wonders were a part of the experience of the church. An experience of the church that glorified God and drew people to faith. You know, after that snake bit Paul and he didn't die, they wanted to know who his God was. And so he told them, it opened doors for them to believe. So why don't signs and wonders occur regularly in our church today? They do occur in churches in other countries. And especially in countries, especially Muslim countries, where you cannot preach Christ, it's been known that Christ has appeared to people in visions and revealed himself to them in their dreams, which is a miraculous thing. But why don't signs and wonders occur in our churches today? I think some of it may be a misunderstanding based on extremism. How many of you are familiar with some of the televangelists who are very dramatic in how they heal people? Anybody? When we were in Costa Rica, that was all the rage, and you would watch these shows, and they would have people come up with illnesses and kind of do this boom, and people would fall, and they'd be healed, and it was all this drama, and something about that just rings hollow to us. And so instead of allowing for God to work, we say, well, it's just an abusive thing to make money or to make show. We don't want all that emotion going on in our services. So, and I think some of it is fear of the abuses that we do see, of extremism, or maybe fear of the unknown, of what might happen. Some have said that signs and wonders don't occur in the church now because it was only for the church in Acts. It's not for the church after Acts. But Martin Lloyd-Jones wrote this. He said, it's perfectly clear that in the New Testament times, the gospel was authenticated by signs, wonders, and miracles of various characters and descriptions. Was it meant to be only true of the early church? The scriptures never anywhere say that these things were only temporary. Never. There is no such statement anywhere. Signs and wonders occurred in the Old Testament. They occurred in the New Testament. There's no statement that says, okay, they're all done. God's not going to do this anymore. Yet I think probably the most predominant reason that we don't see signs and wonders is unbelief. Because believing in a God of miracles, a God who does miracles, is a matter of belief. Let's look again at the story from the Gospel of Mark, because we see here unbelief and I think misplaced belief. I'm not going to read the whole story again. I think many of you are familiar with it. The context of the story is that Jesus has just been up on the mountain, and it's the event that we call the Transfiguration. He took Peter, James, and John with him. He was glorified. They saw Moses and Elijah with him. You know, Peter wanted to stay and build shelters. It was just this glorious experience. And Jesus comes down, and there's all this commotion going on. And this man has brought his son, who is deaf and mute, from this evil spirit who is possessing him. And the disciples have not been able to cast out this demon. And so this father, who was coming with a semblance of belief, is shaken because his son is not being healed. He's heard about Jesus. He knows that the disciples have been sent out. They have been able to perform miracles. So what's going on? And when the boy is brought to Jesus and the man talks about it, he says, Jesus, if you can do anything, take pity on us. And Jesus is like, if I can? Everything's possible for him who believes. And we have that amazing statement of the Father, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. You see, it's clear that the Father understands that while he has a semblance of belief, there is unbelief and uncertainty in his heart. And Jesus often stated that he couldn't do miracles in certain places because the people didn't believe. And I want you to notice the nature of the miracle. And relate that to all the miracles you know of Jesus. You know, Jesus wasn't very showy when he did miracles. I think the most dramatic thing he did was make some mud and put it on this guy's eyes, but he didn't wave his hands and say all these words. In fact, in this passage, it tells us that there were more people coming to see what was going on, and he quickly took this boy and healed him before everybody else would come and make a circus out of it. It wasn't showy. It was to reveal God's love, his compassion, and his power to build and to nurture this man's faith. And this miracle sprang from belief that was expressed in word and prayer, and belief that recognized that it's possible with Jesus. Another element that's at play here is the disciples' misplaced belief. You see, they had performed miracles, and I think the disciples got to the place of being, we can perform miracles. Jesus isn't here. We can take care of you. Wynne Collier writes, I once heard about a student taking a class in preaching at a prominent seminary. The student was a bit full of himself, delivered his sermon with eloquence and evident passion. He sat down self-satisfied, and the professor paused for a moment before responding. That was a powerful sermon. It was well organized and moving. The only problem is that God was not the subject of a single one of your sentences. The professor highlighted a problem all of us struggle with at times. We can talk as if we are the primary actor, when the truth is that God is the primary actor in life. We often profess that God is somehow generally in charge, but then we act as if the outcomes depend on us. And signs and wonders are a matter of belief that it's God who is the one who is able and willing to act, that it's God who needs to be acknowledged as the provider. That's why Jesus said they only come out by prayer. You need to pray to me and recognize that I'm the one who can deliver from this. He's a God of miracles. And where we say impossible, Jesus says, I'm impossible. Same letters, different order. Now I can speak English, so probably would work in Hebrew, but anything we think is impossible, Jesus says, I'm possible. And as I was sitting and listening to some music on a Christian station on the television this week, and Big Daddy Lee's song came on, and there's a line in there that says, even the impossible is your reality, God. Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief. And I don't think that we should be afraid to believe and expect for God to work miraculously in 2019. And one of the greatest ways he works is by rescuing people's lives from brokenness, from pain. And I think we need to reclaim the scriptural truth that our God is a God of miracles. He is a God of signs and wonders. Now, a trait that is highly valued by employers and all that in creativity is thinking outside of the box. But you know, when it comes to God, we don't always think outside the box. We have our little box, our God box. This is the box that tells us who God is and how he acts. In 1961, J.B. Phillips wrote a book called Your God is Too Small. And in that book, he described the boxes that we make for God, that God is like a resident policeman just trying to get us, give us a ticket. That he's this grand old man, or that he's meek and mild, or that he's our managing director. Or we put him in a box that says, yeah, I hear you, Pastor, but, you know, science tells us. Those weren't really miracles. There were other things going on. We know it's the doctors who heal us. That can't happen here. In fact, I've seen miracles dismissed as explaining that Moses parted the Red Sea because there was this unusual environmental phenomenon that happened. It really was a miracle. Maybe you've heard that Jesus didn't really die on the cross, that he really just swooned, so when they took it down and put him in the grave, he woke up. And I heard a dear friend explain that Jesus didn't really feed the 5,000. They all had food, they just didn't want to share. And when Jesus blessed the food and started sharing, they all brought out their food. That's why when he went to feed the 4,000, the disciples were clueless as to why it happened. That's where my God is. I can explain it. I'm smart enough to know that things don't work that way. And J.B. Phillips, in his book, encourages Christians to redefine their understanding of a creator without labels or earthly constraints and seek a meaningful concept of God. You see, the God of Acts Church didn't fit in a box. He broke outside of the box because he's a God of signs and wonders, and he's a God of miracles. But when we put God in a box, he'll say, okay, you don't believe, I can't do what you want me to do. And we may say, okay, Lord, I think I believe a little bit, but then we open it up and there's another box. Not as big, but we still struggle. In Joy Unspeakable, I read that we can produce in churches regularly on Sundays a number of converts. People come to faith. And he says, thank God for that. But the need today is much too great for that. The need today is for authentication of God, of the supernatural, of the spiritual, of the eternal. And this can only be answered by God graciously hearing our cry and shedding forth his Spirit upon us and filling us as he kept filling the early church. In revival, I read, what is needed is some mighty demonstration of the power of God, some enactment of the Almighty that will compel people to pay attention, to look, and to listen. What might that be? It might be that people's broken marriages are restored. It might be that their kids who are addicted to drugs, are addicted to alcohol, are freed from that because they know there's a God who is greater than those things in their lives. Some of you here have those testimonies. It's not us or a 12-step program that can fix things like this. It's God. And God wants to bring his kingdom and his power and his wholeness here, just as he did when he physically walked the earth and his church was new. And it's not about being charismatic or being showy. It's about being the church of the God of miracles who is not bound by our boxes. There's a song that worship team at a previous church I was at sang, and the words just really challenged me. They're, let faith arise in spite of what I see. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. I choose to trust you no matter what I feel, for my champion's not dead. He's alive, and he already knows my every need. Surely he will come and rescue me. God of miracles, come. And so like the Father, we need to say, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. You know, it's kind of funny, because these are Walmart boxes. And on the box, I think it's on this bigger one, I noticed this morning on the tape. It says, living better. It all starts with a box. And I thought, you know what? They're right, because they expect you to open the box. Living better and being the church the way God wants us to be starts with a box. And with opening the box and not confining our God to a box. What is your box that you have God in your life? Are you willing to break it open today? Are you willing to say, you know, I thought signs and wonders were only true in fairy tales. That they were meant for someone else, but not for me. But God was out to get me and to make me a believer. Will you be a believer? Please pray with me. Father God, I know I've been in situations where miracles have been forced, the power of God has seemed forced, and it just doesn't seem right. But God, I know that you are a powerful God. I know that you desire to work in our lives and in our church and in this place the way that you did in the book of Acts. You desire for people to be free from pain, addictions. You desire for people to come to know you. And I pray, Father, that we will look at the boxes we've made that confine you. And you are not a confinable God. You ask us to build your kingdom by touching lives, by releasing the hurt and the sick and the poor, by dismissing the darkness. And you desire to do that in powerful ways. Father, may we be true believers in your power and not let you stay in the box. It's in the name of Jesus Christ that we pray. Amen. Now receive the benediction. Depart now. And as you go, remember, we haven't just been to church, we are the church. Amen. And when the church is the church, it is nothing more, it is nothing less, it is nothing other than the presence of Christ through people. So go into the world and be the church through the transforming love of the risen Christ. Amen.
Amen.